Welcome to another Apollo Papyrus podcast episode. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For this episode, my interview guest is a United States citizen living in Portugal and the author of the LGBTQIA plus novel A Brush with Morality. Her name is Caryl Hallberg, and my interview with Caryl will follow the teleportation sound. Caryl Hallberg, welcome to the Apollo Papyrus podcast.
Thank you so much. I've been looking forward to having the opportunity to have a conversation with you.
Feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Well, I am Caryl Hallberg. I am a writer, novelist. I live in Portugal. I'm a U.S. citizen, but I live in Portugal in a town called Tomar, and I live in a 800-year-old stone house. So I'm steeped in the medieval culture, and I'm very happy to be living where I am living, very blessed to have all that. My most recent novel is A Brush with Mortality, which takes place in San Francisco, however.
Without spoiling too much of your novel, A Brush with Morality, what is the premise in the novel?
Well, the premise, I love that question because it's very rare that an author gets asked about premise, and it's one of the key things for making a good novel great. And this is a literary novel, so it doesn't fall into a genre category. The premise is that everyone is judgmental and that a good portion of the time, the judgments we make are incorrect. And included in that premise is that oftentimes the reader makes incorrect judgments as well.
Keep going.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
What inspired you to write A Brush with Morality?
Well, several things. The story itself is, it's a character-driven novel, not so much plot-driven, though there is a plot. But there's a lot of pieces to this novel for me personally. And one of those pieces is that this is almost a thank you note in an odd way, in a kind of strange way. This is a thank you note to a community of people that if it weren't for their suffering, I would not be alive today. So even though it is a somewhat, it's a little bit of a thriller, it's a little bit of a mystery, it's got some, I wouldn't say kink in it, but it has some spicy moments. What it is it's a thank you note to the gay community, and most specifically to those young men who in the towards the end of the century contracted HIV and died of AIDS in the early days. I lived in San Francisco at that time, was much younger, and I was born with an immune system issue based in my DNA. So everybody's heard about the boy in the bubble kind of thing, right? I was sort of that. I was the girl in the bubble, except I didn't have a bubble and nobody knew what was wrong with me. I was sick my entire childhood. As I grew into an adult, I had one thing after another occur that was unusual, that doctors had trouble defining, that required major surgeries. And when HIV came into being, one of the outcomes of that was research was started, and it was also about the time that DNA became known. And research was done into what was happening to these young men, and primarily young men at the beginning. And that research led to scientists being able to look at my issues, my physicality and my DNA and all that, and discover that I had this genetic malfunction, if you will, that caused all these things to happen to me. And if that research had not been done, I probably would not have survived past 30 years of age, and I'm currently 73 and in very good health. So that's part of it, the research, but also part of it is at that time in San Francisco, because of what was going on with my body, I was put on this ward that was unnamed at the University of California Medical Center in San Francisco. They had designated this entire ward for all these young people that were getting sick and dying very quickly, but they didn't have a name for what was happening yet. They didn't know what was going on. And because they didn't know what was going on with me, I got put on that very, very quiet ward. I was the only person that was mobile. I would wander the ward with my IV pole and visit, and I was also the only female in that ward. And I was the only person visiting. Nobody visited these young men because everybody was afraid of this mystery disease. It was very short-staffed because there weren't very many nurses or technicians that wanted to be around the mystery disease. And these young men were dying so quickly at that point. So those young men and I formed a bond, brief though it may have been. I was the only one visiting their bedside. And at the end of the day, when all was said and done, it was their deaths that allowed me to continue living and producing. So this novel, that's a very long-winded story, but it's very important to me personally. It is that research and those young men that gave their lives, and then other people as AIDS progressed that gave their lives, that allowed me to be living here in Portugal at the ripe old age of 73. And this novel is my thank you note to them. One of the main characters is a very elderly, bisexual gentleman who happens to be dying of AIDS. And he's in hospice care, and his hospice worker is my main character. And it's their conversations about life and death and meaning and love that are the larger part of this novel. So very long-winded answer, but this novel is very personal to me, so I apologize. But there you go.
As your novel is a literary fiction novel, what are some main differences between genre fiction novels and literary fiction novels?
No, another good question. Okay, so in the different genres, and what we know of genre, where there's romance, there's mystery, there's thriller, there's suspense, there's historical novels. Those are all different genres. And each of those genres have tropes, if you will, standard ways of presenting the story. The reader of a romance novel knows what the core concern and the core arc of the protagonist is going to be. They know that there's going to be some kind of push me, pull you in the romance. There's just things that happen. And the same in a mystery. In a mystery, you know there's going to be a crime, but there's going to be a detective trying to solve the crime. And they will go through different stages, and they will have different certain vulnerabilities, and things happen that always happen in every mystery. And the same with a thriller or a suspense novel or a spy novel. Literary fiction is less based on those standard tropes than it is on the words. Literary fiction traditionally can be about society. It can be a statement about societal issues, so a commentary on current society or culture. But literary novels also are far more concerned with language, the structure of the sentences, the structure of the paragraph, and the beauty of the language and the imagery. Literary fiction is a lot more concerned with character than it is with plot. So you really learn about the characters more than whether or not there's a car chase, right? It's more important to know about the history of the driver than the car chase. So that's the primary thing. Literary novels are about the words and about culture and about the beauty of language.
You are, from what I understand, a straight cisgender white woman, but you're writing about, in a brush with reality, there are some writing about gay and bisexual interactions and even some light BDSM. How did you assure that your novel has the feeling of this authenticity and truth for its readers?
Okay, so yes, that was very important to me to make sure I got it right. And you are right. I am straight, I am white, I am cis, I am an old white woman, which, by the way, gives me a certain degree of power, because as an old white woman, I can be the ally for underserved or underrepresented communities. I can say anything I want. And what are people going to do? Right. So that's part of it. I get to have a voice for others. That's the power, the superpower of an old white woman, if she chooses to use it properly. But I was writing about things that I have no personal experience with. And I wanted to be very, very sure that I got it right. So I did a number of things, but my favorite story about that is that in San Francisco, I lived in Noe Valley in San Francisco at one time, and there's an Italian restaurant on 24th Street that I'm not going to name. And what I did with their agreement, I talked to them, and I would go in between the lunchtime crowd and the dinner time crowd, and they gave me a table in the back of the restaurant, and this is before the internet as we know it, so I had to put ads in paper periodical kind of things and on some what they called bulletin boards back then. And I advertised and I asked for people for whom spanking was a sexual practice. And I set up times for these people to come in and speak with me. And they came into the Italian restaurant, so safe space, right? It wasn't my place, wasn't their place. It was a safe space. It was empty. The wait staff had instructions to come and get their orders, for which I would pay, of drinks or food or whatever. And once everything was served, the wait staff was instructed not to come to my table. And so very much in a kind of Godfather, Italian mafia kind of movie scenario, I had the table, I'm facing the door, we're way in the back, nobody's allowed to come near us. And these people would come in one at a time with their permission. I recorded our conversations, and they would share with me everything from their childhood to their current life and all of their stories and their practices and what it felt like. And we really dove deep into their practices around spanking as a sexual act, which plays a key role in the novel. I did the same thing with, I have quite a few, I had, and I still have quite a few close friends in the LGBTQ community. And I was blessed that they were agreeable to sitting down with me and just really, again, going deep, sharing their experiences, how they felt about their experiences, the actual details of practice, all of that. And I went as deep as I could. And I did that with every aspect of this novel. I worked with a detective whose only job is solving murders. And he and I spent hours and hours him instructing me on how to best create murders without leaving any evidence. And I worked with DNA experts on that as well. So every aspect of this novel, I researched talking directly with people. I was so blessed to have that. And then when the manuscript was written and mostly edited by my wonderful editor, we sent it out to beta readers that were very carefully selected to not only be knowledgeable about literary novels structure, but also to be very knowledgeable about the communities represented and be part of those communities. And they also gave me feedback. And of course, everyone that helped me gave me feedback on the early manuscripts, drafts, to make sure I got it right. So I'm pretty confident I got it right. And I tried very hard to be sensitive to all of the different communities that are represented in this novel. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. My next question is, how does mental and emotional health play into your writing?
Well, it completely accidentally, I have discovered in this novel, and then looking back at some novels I wrote under a pseudonym prior, and at my current work in progress, I discovered that I accidentally tend to give my main character, my protagonist, always seems to have some type of mental health challenge that they have to deal with. So in my current work in progress, which is going to be a series, it details a family of Sicilian witches who live in the Massachusetts and Vermont area. It goes through 3 generations of these people. And in this first book in the series, the mother of the protagonist is bipolar. And I didn't know she was bipolar until after I started writing, after the outline, after I started writing, and I'm going, well, why is she behaving this way? And then I realized that she has undiagnosed bipolar tendencies. In A Brush with Mortality, our protagonist is suffering from a form of amnesia, but also is a PTSD trauma survivor that is undiagnosed. So she had, and I can't say too much else, but she has a definite mental health issue that isn't fully disclosed until the penultimate chapter of the book. And that's the moment at which the reader has to decide, well, they had one judgment about this person, and now they're learning something else about them. And are they going to change how they feel about the protagonist is the question that I'm asking my readers. I don't know why I've chosen to do that. I am by trade, other than being a writer, and among other things that I've done in my 73 years, I did go back to school and get my degree, and I do cognitive behavioral therapy. I work with a lot of people with anxiety, and so that may be why I include those things, but I include them as a piece of the character and not necessarily as a flaw. It's just a piece of the whole character because people are very complex and we all have something. If we think we're normal, then we're probably really not, because everybody has trauma and everybody has challenges, and some are diagnosed and some aren't, and some are physical and some are mental and some are emotional. And if you're building a really well-rounded, relatable character, you need to include those sorts of things. And mine happens to be, with my protagonist, happens to be a mental health challenge that they have to work with and deal with. So it's just something I've incorporated as a way of humanizing the protagonists that I write.
Is A Brush with Morality self-published, traditionally published, or hybrid published?
This one, in the past, I have had traditional publishing under a pseudonym. This is self-published. It's my first fictional self-published book. I worked with a great professional editor and really was blessed with the cover design artist and all of that. But yeah, it's self-published. I did that very deliberately because I wanted to have absolute control over the cover and content of this novel. I was concerned that should I be able to sell it to, a publisher, that because of how they might want to market it or how they might want to soften it a little bit, it would not stay true to my intent. And I didn't want it to become a cliche. So this project is a project of the heart. Absolutely a project of the heart. As I said, it's a thank you note to a huge community of people. And I wanted it to really stay as true as possible to its intent. So this one is self-published. And I have to say, I have really, really enjoyed being an independently published author. I think this is the most fun I've had in my entire career with publishing, because you do get to have this artistic control that can sometimes get lost when you go with a trad publisher. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with the series. We'll see what happens when I finish this book and get it edited. We'll see what I want to do with it as I start with the second book. But A Brush with Mortality, I'm really pleased I went the indie route. And I think it's a wave of the future also, just for publishing. I think that indie publishing is getting better and better. The professionalism of it has jumped leaps and bounds in recent years. And it's the way to go in this current technology age that we're in.
You are also a writing coach. What is your work as a writing coach like, and what do you find to be the biggest block for the writers who you coach?
Oh, another good question. So I started doing developmental editing and writing and coaching writing for fictional writing because before that, I was doing my therapeutic practice, the cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a very practical modality within psychotherapy. And then I love working with writers and supporting writers. So I sort of morphed that CBT practice into working with writers and coaching them. And I was coaching all writers, so academic people and nonfiction stuff. And then I just have narrowed it down to fiction because at my age, I get to do whatever the heck I want. And I don't do anything unless I'm having fun with it. I don't take on clients unless I think they have potential and I enjoy working with them. So I'm in a very, extra nice place to be in your life to be able to pick and choose like that. I love working with new writers, people that have just started writing a novel or whatever, because they have such interesting ideas and new takes, and they're still finding their voice. And to be able to help them do that, find their voice and figure out the craft, that's a really fun thing to do for me. What stops writers, whether you're an experienced writer or a novice or a beginner, whatever, if you're writing a novel and you think you know what you're doing, you get to a point where you realize unless you're like super productive, like some very successful authors that we know that can just churn out a book after book after book, you get to a point where you're going, I don't know, I'm stuck. I don't know what happens next. Or even if I know what happens next, I don't know how to get there. And you get stuck. There's lots of names for that. There's writer's block, which is a little different. There's just not being disciplined, so you're not sitting down and writing every day. And there's the mid-novel blues, which I just addressed in a TikTok video, actually, that got tons of views, where you're just kind of bored with your own stuff. And you just don't know what direction you want to go in or what your protagonist is, what the arc is that you thought you knew it, but now it's not making as much sense as it did. Those are the things that block you and that really are hard to get past. And of course, the answer is always the same. Just keep writing, write something else, write a different scene, write another part of the book, write, do writing exercises, do something, but start writing and it will come to you. What my stand that I take with the kids and the adults that I work with both is that you have to find your own way. There's thousands of books on how to write. There's hundreds of thousands of people out there coaching how to write or helping you write. And the answer is there's no one answer. Everybody has an answer. All the answers are correct. You have to find the one that works for you. So for me, when I get stuck, I give myself a day of no responsibility, which means I am not productive in anything. I don't cook. I don't bake. I don't read. I don't do anything productive. I don't garden. I don't do anything productive. And the only thing I do is walk the dog and feed my animals. That's it. Everything else is mindless television that I've seen before that I don't have to think about, or mulling about or taking walks or something, but nothing productive. And I try and keep my novel, my story at the front of in my consciousness, not trying to solve the problem, just trying to keep it conscious, make it part of my reality. And I find that by the end of the day, I often will have a light bulb moment, a breakthrough, and then I can go back to writing. I'll take copious notes, go to bed, and come back in the morning, try and decipher my notes and start writing again. So that's what works for me. But there's different techniques for everyone to get past that stopped place. And everybody experiences it. And nobody should feel bad about it. They just have to find out how they can work through it.
I have only several minutes left in this interview, but I have one final question. What is your best piece of advice that you would offer someone who wants to try their hand at writing a novel?
Oh, gosh. It used to be different, but it's pretty succinct now. Don't use AI. Don't use AI. Don't rely on AI. Don't use AI for editing. just stay as far away from AI as you can and trust yourself. And then the second piece is to just get the entire story written. If you're writing a novel, just write the story and don't worry about how good it is. And don't worry about your spelling or your grammar or whether the dialogue makes sense. Just write the whole first draft and get it out there, finished. And then when that's done, you have it and you can go back and you can rewrite and edit and tighten up your language and make your dialogue just absolutely scintillating, and you can discard what doesn't work, and you can work on each line of prose until it's absolute poetry. But your story will be told, and you will be able to get through that second draft and then work with an editor and beta readers and other people to get through your third and hopefully final draft. But that first draft, just write. Don't care about how good it is. Don't care about anything except getting the story out.
Caryl, thank you for appearing on the Apollo Papyrus podcast. You were an amazing guest.
Thank you so much. I really loved doing this with you. I have listened to so many of your podcasts, and I think they're great. And it's just really good energy. So I appreciate the opportunity to be a guest on this. And I hope everyone will go to my website, which is carylhallberg.com, and learn more about me and about my novels and what I do. And A Brush with Mortality is currently available on Amazon, but it's also available in paperback or e-book form at booksellers everywhere.
Caryl was a fascinating guest to interview, and it was wonderful to interview her. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to find your writing and reading purpose. Bye for now. Copyright 2024, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited, except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.